Cousin Ebony, how are you? Bristol in the place to be. Let's see. Doc, what's good? Uh-oh. I don't do the right.
Hello.
There we go. Hey.
I'm okay. How are you?
How you doing? I'm good. I'm making sure I get everything situated, but I'm doing pretty good. Okay. So, the first thing, my what do you call it? My little stand just acted a little crazy. So if the phone falls, I'm okay.
Listen,
It's just
so
not.
is mine. Right before this, my phone fell, and I was like, you know what? I know this is not getting ready to fall on this call, so I have it propped up. I wish you could see it. I have papers shoved underneath it. So, anyways.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was gonna do something like that, but I mean, if it falls, I'll put it on this laptop. That's what I'll do. Well, folks, I'm glad y'all done pulled up. This is none other than Cole Arthur Riley, who is, of course, a writer, born and partly raised in Pittsburgh.
Yes.
You studied writing at Pittsburgh as well, right? Okay. But of course, if you read the book, traces writing back to her father, and I believe your grandmother was also a writer, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you are currently the spiritual teacher in residence with Cornell University's Office of Spirituality and Meaning Making. That sounds like a lot of work there.
Not as much work as it sounds. I promise you.
Oh yeah. Okay. And then also the creator of Black Liturgies, a space for Black spiritual words of liberation, lament, rage, and rest, and a project of the Center of Dignity and Contemplation, where you also serve as executive curator there as well. All right. And we're going to be talking about this here flesh. There it is.
I can't believe
See my tab game?
Can't even believe that.
Those are all your gems. Yeah, everybody's always like, wow, and it's legit. I mean, most times, each tab is usually like at least one highlight, but there's some in here, where there's like multiple. So yeah, it's all legit. Wow. It's all here. This is all you, Cole. Yes. So my first question is, what is liturgy? Like, if you could explain liturgy and contemplative spirituality in its simplest terms, what would you say?
So liturgy, in its simplest terms, it means work of the people. That's like the Greek that it comes from, means work of the people. But it really is just like any kind of form for connecting with the divine, any kind of so I think the most obvious ones would be like if you've been to a Catholic mass or like an Anglican rite or anything like that, that kind of flow of service would be the liturgical format. That's the most commonly recognized, but like lots of things possess a liturgy. I think Black churches have their own liturgy, and I don't think it necessarily even needs to be religious. But yeah, the word itself means work of the people, so it's like some kind of collective, or trying to serve the collective. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. When I looked it up, it said something like a collective public worship, and it was like usually attached to religion, but it could be, like you said, it can just kind of be attached to all kinds of different things. Okay. And your space, Black Liturgies, is a space where Black words, like those words, dignity, lament, rage, and hope, are like, celebrated, right? But why those 4 words specifically? Why lament, rage, dignity, and hope?
I've used different words at different times, honestly, but I think I was trying to choose words that include, some kind of emotional expressions, but also some kind of embodied expression, words that couldn't kind of be reduced to one part of someone's self, but like this holistic kind of view of spirituality. At least that's what I was trying to do. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I can rock with that. I can rock with that. Now we're gonna go ahead and dive. I think these first few questions here, we're gonna start diving into the book, right? So one of the first things I noticed was that in this book, I don't know if it was like an experiment that you were doing, or if this is just kind of how you view God, but God is kind of gender fluid, oscillating between him,
Mm-hmm.
her, they, and them, right? And I know you talk a little bit about that in the book, but can you kind of talk about that for the viewers who may not, have seen
Mm-hmm.
God mentioned in
Yeah,
those
I
different ways?
think for me, I have a difficult time praying to God as Father. That's never really connected with me. I've done it in group settings,
Hmm.
just kind of to like acquiesce and like not make waves. But like to be honest, it never really felt right to me to like address the divine as Father. Um, and it's sad. I think people are way too. People get really threatened by this when you say God is they or she. There's a
Yeah.
wonderful book that just came out by Christina Cleveland, Dr. Christina Cleveland, called God is a Black Woman. And she talks about this pilgrimage she does to all these different Black Madonnas in France and just like untangling herself from this white male God presence in her life. So beautiful. So if the language that I use is new to you, I would strongly recommend that book because she does a really good job of like undoing the whiteness of God. Um, in a way that I think is really beautiful. I wish I had her book when I wrote mine. But anyways, I was trying to write, I wanted to write about spirituality. I wanted to honor the fact that, this book happened through Black liturgies. And that's a spiritual space. And if I'm going to talk about spirituality, I want it to be as liberating and inclusive as possible. I want it to be as free as possible. And I'm not really interested in like narrowing in on exactly what I think God is. I'm much more interested in like kind of expanding and like living in that expansion of the divine as opposed to zeroing in. And so I think like that fluidity and like the gender of the divine is like one example of how I want to do that, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I've been reading a lot of like, non-binary works and gender fluid works lately. And so I've seen people oscillate between like the he and she, but then with yours was the first time I guess expanded my viewpoint and was
Mm-hmm.
able to hold they and them, which it makes perfect sense. And you talk a little bit about that. But I mean, obviously
Mm-hmm.
God is like limitless. And so when we do that, you kind of like you said, you narrow in on something that can
Exactly.
really be so much more. And that was something I really
I'm glad.
appreciated when I was reading it. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's see here. All right. Yeah. Let's do this one because this is pretty good here. Okay. So in the book's preface, you open with an amazing scene from Beloved in which Baby Suggs
Mm-hmm.
gathers everyone in the clearing, right? She invites the children to come and laugh and their mothers to hear it. She calls the men to come down and dance and allow their wives and children to view it. And lastly, she calls the women to the center and says, cry for the living and the dead. At the end of the book, you say you believe that our ancestors knew things about freedom that you can't even begin to articulate. How is that illustrated in Shug's request to defy humanity's assertion that liberation is
Oh, oh
linear
my
and pure?
goodness. Wow.
Yes, I
I
gave you
know
the
you were
easy
like giving
ones
me
at
the
first,
softball.
and
I'm
then
like, oh, you did so many things in that question. So yeah, I didn't even connect that I had said that towards the end of the book, and that I've grounded the book in the scene in the clearing that you've just
uh-huh,
retold perfectly. This beautiful scene. Um, it's a spiritual moment. The clearing. It's a spiritual space. She's about to give her sermon. Um, but before she kind of delivers
mhm,
this speech, she's leading them in this kind of sacred cry of the body, as you just explained. So you have the weeping, the laughing, you have the dancing. It's this going back to the Black liturgies concept. It's this emotional and embodied and storied kind of experience of each collective experience. Beautiful moment in the clearing. And I think, I don't know, people well, it's my fault. I put liberation in the subtitle, but people ask me a lot about liberation, and they're like, how do you know that you're there? And I don't really, in writing this book, I realized like you have to I had to be articulate about something that I've never really needed to. You just say freedom, and like everyone kind of feels it, and you feel it more in your body than in like some kind of cognitive explanation of what liberation is. And in writing this, I realized like I don't actually know if I believe liberation is this like linear pursuit where you're getting free and then you found it and that's it. I think you can ebb and flow out of like liberating spaces, a liberating selfhood. You can enter and I mean, at least for me, that's how it's happened. And I also realized that I think in going into the stories of my grandma, I started to become kind of offended at how I viewed my ancestors before, as if they were less far, like less down the road of liberation as I am, just because I have more of the same freedoms that white men have. Like, was there something in them that was also free? Was there something they understood about liberation? Was there something about the clearing that they understood that I don't even understand yet? And Toni Morrison, in The Site of Memory, she talks about making assumptions about the interior life of her ancestors who were enslaved and making the mistake of thinking she knew better than they did, and every time realizing that their interior life was so much more, like when she was practicing this imagination, she'd realize, no, their interior life must have been so rich. They must have been like, their view of liberation must have been so complicated. Anyways, I've just ranted, but I think to view liberation less as these like less in terms of what you can articulate and more in terms of these embodied experiences, these intergenerational experiences, I think can only help. I think I have something to learn about the freedom that my ancestors were able to tap into while enslaved. I have something to learn from them. I don't think I'm any more like advanced or knowledgeable. You know what I mean? And sometimes when we talk about our ancestors, I get the sense that we can do that. At least I can. So Toni Morrison checked me. Yeah.
Listen, when I because like I always do like so I read straight through, and then when I'm going through my tabs, I'm looking for like these connectors. And so when I initially read it, it was two things. I was like, man, I got to read Beloved one more time. There's so much happening in Beloved that is just so amazing. And then when I was reading what you were saying about like, you should, there's all these emotions that we try to act like we shouldn't kind of engage with, specifically like rage and, and how lament can be something that, you have this beautiful line. I was going to put them all in this little section that's called bars, but you had this beautiful line where you were like, you come here and you know how to cry, but you don't know how to like cry the right way where it serves you, right? And I think that's something that Baby Suggs was kind of teaching all of those folks before they get to, the sermon. And I was like, man, what an awesome thing to ground like a book like this in.
I love that connection of it. Like, it's not always intuitive, I think. We can talk about lament, we can talk about grief, but I really don't think it's always intuitive. Sometimes you need someone to take you there. Sometimes you need someone to guide you through it. Sometimes you need to see it demonstrated in someone else. The woman are crying, and then eventually they all get tangled up in each other, right? And the children are crying, and the men are dancing, and the women are laughing, and it's like they've learned something from absurd. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good part. I'm thinking too about, what you're talking about in the chapter about wonder. I know you say like if you want to find God, then look at a soap bubble. Like, like God is in that entanglement that's going on in the clearing.
Yeah.
Like I said, I was just blown away um, early on in the preface, y'all. So y'all need to go get it. So speaking of Toni Morrison, Zora Neale Hurston, and all of these matriarchs of writing for us. My brother Dante Stewart's scholarship is kind of geared towards something that you mentioned in the December 2021 write up with the Sojourner. You and he both echo an inability to separate your Black experience with
Yes.
scripture from Black literature. You said that one time you were in class and you're reading about Toni Morrison, Zora Neale Hurston for the first time, and you couldn't separate that from Sunday when you were reading Isaiah for the first time. For you, what is that connection, and why do you think that separation is
Yeah.
oftentimes impossible?
First of all, love Dante. And that's one of the things he and I bonded over right away. We
Yeah, that's
saw
good.
something in each other's work. We're like, huh, this is interesting. So we have similar stories in that way. But I was, a first generation college student. And so to me, the college experience in general was just one big, like, strange new world. And it was like home and
Yeah,
college. And so I was I started to go to church regularly for the first time in college. That was the first time I was like being taught concrete things about God, for better and worse. They were very white dominated spaces. So it's the first time I was doing that. And also it was the first time I didn't read Toni Morrison until college. I didn't read Zora Neale Hurston until college, James Baldwin, all of these people that you might encounter in high school. I was encountering them for the first time in college. So I was having like this literary awakening in the classroom, and I couldn't separate it from I couldn't separate it from Sunday, because to me it was just all new. And so I
yeah,
think I think you see in a lot of Black literature these like the common refrain of spirituality, and done in a very different way. So so I say these awakenings were happening at the same time, but in the classroom, Toni Morrison, her spirituality, it's kind of queer. It's like it's weird, like it's magic. Zora Neale Hurston, it has this magic quality, this kind of mystic is the word I would use in Black
yeah,
literature. Then I would like go to Sunday in this like predominantly white Presbyterian church, bless their hearts, and they're like, this is what you need to think, like here's the doctrine, here's the creeds. And so I'm very, in hindsight, very grateful that I was encountering a different kind of spirituality in literature, just because I think it made me as a spiritual being more free. Like I was hearing these things and I'd always kind of check it against like, well, I'm also keenly aware there's another way to do this. So I could never
yeah,
be fully
yeah,
indoctrinated into those like spaces, and I'm grateful for that.
yeah,
Yeah. So it happened at the same time. I think there's so much, I mean, especially the people who we've lost, I was reading Bell Hooks the other day. I was reading James Baldwin. I mean, maybe this is true a little bit less than it used to be, but I feel like even if you have no kind of interest in God or interest in the Bible, I think most Black people have been formed by the church and have been formed. Like my parents didn't take us to church growing
yeah,
up, but my grandma still played us gospel music and like would say these spiritual things. Like it was like a different kind of spirituality that that is true of my formation. And I think that's true of most, well, I don't want to make broad statements, but and so
I
yeah, and
think
so
I
you
agree
see
with
that
you
so
though.
much in writing.
Yeah,
Like it's not
yeah.
necessarily trying to teach you about who God is, but you still see that in the characters. That's still included in like the people that we're encountering in ways that I think we can learn from. Yeah.
Word. Awesome, awesome. Also, I forgot to say this at the beginning because I started nerding out, guys. But if you have any questions, either drop them in the chat or put them in the question box. Um, but yeah, I agree totally. I think about that often because like you see in today's time, a lot of folks are like or at least
Mhm.
in my circles, right? Because we might generalize, but that's literally probably like the 30 people that I talk to all the time. But in my circles, I see people talking about how they're, getting away from the church
Mhm.
or like organized religion, right? But like you said, they're
Yeah.
like formed by it. And so like when it hits the fan,
Mhm.
they pray. Like they could say how far out they get, but I agree. I mean, you're like formed by this,
Yeah.
just by proximity to your elders for
Mhm. Yeah.
a lot of us. Yeah. Now, speaking of these, like of how you're informed by your elders, there are many times when you tell a familiar story and scene from the Bible only to alert the reader to a less explored but connected one. For example, on the day the world began to die, God became a seamstress. When Eve and Adam ate from the tree and the decay and despair began to creep in, no one ever told me the story of a God who kneels and makes clothes out of animal skin. Now, this isn't the only instance of this in the book. There are so many beautiful things like this throughout. But what are you saying about the God contemplation brings and the way it differs from the
Mm.
God people
Yeah.
oftentimes give? Because everybody centers on,
Yeah.
okay, they ate the apple, now they got to
Yep.
go.
Yep.
You know? You know? And no one talks about this. This is the first time I've ever saw that. I was like, and that's a bar on the day the world began to
Mhm.
die, God became a seamstress.
Mhm.
Like, but yeah, what are you saying about like the God that contemplation brings aside from the God
Yeah.
that is
I'll
oftentimes given?
first say that line was added like at the last possible second. Like I'm talking, I think that was one of the few things I added while we
Yeah.
were copy editing, which is not that's it's just frowned upon. It's rude to do. But I I really so I'll tell you about the way I wrote that maybe first, and that is maybe a symptom of contemplation of, I said I didn't want to write a book that was like trying to tell anyone what to believe, and tell everyone to think what I think.
Mm,
I didn't want to bring someone into this book just so I could get them at the end of it to think exactly what I think. I was just interested in like conveying the human experience. And so I had that line written like in Genesis 2, da 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 da, this, and then I said the verse, and I thought, that's such
yeah.
an aggressive, that's such an intense way. I mean, chapter 1 to like bring in scripture for people who have been traumatized by the Bible, for people who are disinterested and being indoctrinated. And I'm like, how can I write that in a way that's like truer to the craft of writing as opposed to like, I'm going to tell you what to think. This is what happened. So anyways, I'm glad that you
Mm-hmm.
like mentioned that sentence in particular because it was definitely late to the game. So in the way that I wrote it, I wanted to write it in like this kind of story. I wanted to focus on the story of it, not on the like this is what you need to think. I wanted to tell the story. And then the actual like contents of that. So I also I never no one's ever taught me about that verse. Strangely enough, like you just hear like the curses and like you're
Yeah.
um but
It's like,
I can't remember, I can't exactly remember where I was when I read that for the first time, but I remember it just pausing over it and being like, how have I missed this? There's this moment, it's very subtle, it's in like the silent, I think the silences in most stories are what makes a story beautiful. If you like think about the Oscar noms, it's usually stories that contain a little bit of silence, a little bit of absence, in what they're trying to communicate. I think the same is
mm-hmm.
true of the stories we find in the Bible. So it's a very silent moment. And I started to think like, what did that actually look like? God made the clothes. God in the story, God makes the first kill. He kills an animal. Like, what is that? And so I'm like, oh, when you
Yeah.
read it like that in the context of storytelling, it seems like a much more tender, kind of complicated moment of like this send off that's like also very tragic, and something's being done about their shame, in a way that I think is beautiful and more,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
more tender than the way I'd encountered it before. And I think contemplation can do that to you, like not all, but like when you're able to just rest in a story, when you're able to just rest in a thing, not so much concerned with what you're being taught. You're like, let me just listen and hear, you know, what grief sounds like in this moment, and hear what, you know, loss sounds like in this moment. Yeah, good contemplation, I think, should do that at least.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like you said, I think there's a part in here too where you talk. It's very small. You're not doing a lot about it. You kind of mention it as you're moving through, but that God is oftentimes,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
associated with silence, right? And so when you're talking about like some of the best parts in stories, I think some of the best
Mm-hmm.
things, right, kind of come in silence. A lot of times, that whole aspect of rest
Yeah.
kind of becomes important. Um, and leads me to this cool question I have. I have like 40 of them, and I just kind of shoot them based on what I'm hearing. Um, but your meditation on fear is palpable. You write, fear becomes anxiety when it makes its home in you. Its chief attachment is not memory or a villain or a situation or future. Its chief attachment is you. And throughout this book, the reader's experience draws a picture of
Yeah.
God through your own, kind of like what you were saying when you didn't want to like make this like an instructional book, but more so like something where
Yeah.
ride through the human experience. You said that God doesn't bid us toward courage as we might perceive it. Rather, they bid us towards rest. Fear's sister. You say fear's origin is not evil, even though evil has wielded it. Can you
Yeah.
talk about fear's propensity to lead us towards protection and trust, and how it is important to disrupt our understandings of it through a communion with God in which we sit
Mm.
with the tension and
You
harmony of it?
ask such beautiful questions. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, I can. So I'm a super anxious person. I'm just a scared person in general. I'm not. That's not self-deprecating. I'm not ashamed of that. I just have always been very scared since I was a kid. I'm scared of my own shadow. Very
Yeah.
jumpy. Not a risk taker. And um, I think I've had a really complicated relationship to fear in my anxiety, because I think, as you said, that I wrote, like, there's a kind of fear that becomes so present that, of course, it's like this weight, this violence. Even, I think it can do violence to your body. But I think when you think about it, like, at its root, fear really isn't so negative. You know, fear is the thing that keeps you from
Hmm.
jumping from building to building. It's the thing that keeps you from putting your hand over a flame. You know, it's for I think Black people, for marginalized people, there's a certain fear in our bodies that I think is an intuition that, like, telling us when a
Yeah.
space isn't safe or a person isn't safe. Like, I don't mean to sound like hokey, but I really do. The older I get, the more I'm starting to listen to that kind of like heart racing or that pressure in my chest, like, that's telling me, like, not like this space isn't as safe as you thought it was. Like, you know, like. And so I think there are
Yeah.
kinds of
Yeah.
fear
Yeah.
that are or maybe fear at its like most in its most pure form can be this protective force, and can be kind of even a biological response, teaching us like what's safe, when to bounce and when to stay, and who to trust, um, and what our limits are. But of course, it can become something bad. You know, I just hate the, you know, of the many things that I think white supremacy has done to
Yeah. Yeah.
human emotion, I think, is this desire to like conquer, like this and so we talk about
Hmm.
conquering fears. It's the strangest thing. It's the strangest. I just think it's such a strange way to even like talk about something that can be such a protective force. Like, why do we want to why does it have to be this like triumphalism? Like, can it be like meeting one's fear, and what is there to understand from, you know, the way my hands are sweating, or like, you know, the way I was nervous
Yeah.
before I got on this live. I'm like, whoo, I'm nervous. And like, what questions? So what did I ask myself? I asked, why are you so nervous? I said, well, because he's so damn cool. Like, he's gonna think you're not cool. And then I had to go there. Well, what if you're not cool, Cole? What does that mean? Do you think you're gonna be loved less? Do you think Black people
Yeah.
won't like you? And so it actually becomes this like really beautiful encounter with myself, as opposed to this thing I need to defeat and like yeah. So I reject that. I reject conquering fears. Like, come for me in my DMs. I don't care. I want a relationship to my body that's about self-understanding and about becoming more near, drawing more near to myself. Yeah.
Yeah. That first of all, thank you for thinking I'm cool because
You
sometimes,
are.
I wonder. I really I appreciate that. For my nervousness, what I do is I run like in a circle around my couch and I say, "Oh my God, I'm interviewing somebody and they're so smart. Oh my God, what am I gonna do?" I tell my wife that, and then she says, "Shut up, Jared." And then I come in here and I do it. I just do it. Yeah, it's so funny because I always so like you're saying, right? Like fear's origin isn't necessarily evil. It's just kind of like how people have wielded it, you know, and that it can lead us to I want to get it exactly right, but basically I think it's protection, yeah, protection and trust. That fear and reverence, I guess, that I have for like you guys as writers creates
Yeah.
these questions, because I'm like, I want to show them
Mm.
just how much I enjoyed the book. I want to show them, I read it, so in depthly. So I get that, and like you said, the encounter of engaging with that emotion, all the emotions that you mentioned in the book, is like super important in a world that wants you not to
Yeah.
engage with the body, right? Which leads me to another question here. Let me make sure where that here it is. Yeah, here it is right here. Um, so in Body, you write that the story of God becoming body is only matched by God's submission to the body of a woman. And when Christ's body is broken and blood shed, we should hold in mystery that first a woman's body was broken, her blood shed, in order to deliver the hope of the world into the world. Your grandmother's story and your story about the body becoming spectacle and the weight of that through so many horrific assaults, to use your powerful contemplations as I've continued to do throughout the interview. In a world that's desperate to make an enemy of your body,
Mm-hmm.
how do you befriend it? Um, in what ways can women and queer women resurrect the power, pleasure, protection, and presence
Yeah.
that they all were meant for?
I think it's a hard ask. The more I ask that of myself, the more I realize, man, it's really difficult. I've
Yeah.
um there are I always like to start by, not always, but recently I've started to begin by saying, like, there are reasons why we've dissociated from our bodies. Part of it is suppression, of course, and also part of it is like a very real trauma response in the body of the people who, yeah, have
Mm-hmm.
been hurt. And I also live with chronic illness now, and so I on a day-to-day basis I experience a lot of pain. I've started to say, like, what are you really asking of people when you ask them to listen to their bodies and befriend their bodies? Because for some of us, for Black people, for disabled people, it comes at a cost. That and it's good.
Yeah.
It's worth paying the cost, but just to acknowledge it, at least to say, like, it's, when I attune to my body, I then realize, like, my hands hurt and my eyes feel like someone's stabbing them, and like I become aware, or I realize that I'm the
Yeah.
only Black person in a room, or I'm fat and have the voices of fat phobic voices in my head. So becoming aware to our bodies, I think it is costly. I don't think it's this like raw like feel good thing in the way that sometimes it's presented. I'm laughing because I'm not trying to like subtweet anyone, but I do think it can present it lately, because talking about the body is like the new thing. I think it can be presented in this very like
Yeah.
flippant way, as opposed to this, like, yeah, it's serious to ask people to do this. Are you prepared to care for someone after they've attuned to their body, after they've listened to what's going on in their bodies? Do you have care before you can go there? So anyways, I start with that, but like I said, I think the cost of being disembodied was way greater for me. And I think ultimately, if I'm not in my body, someone else is someone else has the
Mm-hmm.
power. Someone's at the helm, you know. I'm not just walking around
Yeah.
empty like
Yeah.
that. And usually that's whiteness, usually that's capitalism, you know, usually that's the patriarchy. If I'm not here, someone else is. And I've had to remind myself, like, there's a toll. It might feel like survival to be dissociate from the body, but ultimately, like, that, I'm not gonna survive that way. The cost is too great. So yeah, I can't even remember what your question is, but for me, I do, you know, some more serious attunement to the body when I know I can have therapy and care after, or I know I can rest after. But I think there are like really simple, I don't want to say shallow, but yeah, really simple practices. So I've started to set alarms for every 15 minutes when I'm writing to remind me to look up from my laptop and stare
Mm-hmm.
out the window, which is very good for eye health for all you writers out there, anyone who works at a desk. Like, protect your eyes. So I started to literally set an alarm, something as simple as that, to remind me, look up and remember, you're in a body, your eyes have needs. Stop viewing them as expendable in the pursuit of creativity. Your body's not expendable just because you're a creative. So that's a small example,
Amen.
but I really think it takes a community. You can't tell someone to listen without the community who can care for them once they hear, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. You answered the question. You kind of got into another question, which I kind of just turned to a statement. But like you have in the calling, you talk about like the knowing of the self should
Mm-hmm.
be a relentless pursuit, right? And so like setting those alarms is important. You know, like you are not allowing some of these, like you said, when
Mm-hmm.
someone else tries to get at the helm, right, or and then tell you that you should go and do 10,000 hours as fast as you can on writing. You just stay in the moment and you look at the computer for hours, and now you messed up. You messed up your eyes, right, and yourself, in that pursuit because you should
Yeah.
be taking that time, to make sure that you're taking care of your body and your
Mm-hmm.
and your
Yep.
spirit all at once. Yeah, yeah. All right, let's see. Yes, let's go with this one. All right. Well, we do have look like a few questions, so I'll pull some of those up too. Um, but wonder is one of my favorite chapters because it speaks of wonder as a force of liberation. You say that wonder makes sense of what our souls inherently know we were meant for. Every mundane glimpse is salve on the wound, instructions on how to set bone right again. If you really want to get free, find God out in the subway. Find God in soap bubbles. This chapter meshes well into calling when you write about how natural it is for Black folk to not lock their understanding of God into a church. You say every Black person knows what it took fancy theologians and philosophers years to articulate that
Mm-hmm.
God is in fact in the streets. Um, can you speak to how wandering with God daily affects your understanding of calling? Because I think what you yourself have as a quote unquote calling literally involves the finding of God everywhere and in everything, and the acknowledgement of their presence in the midst of dignity,
Yeah.
lament, rage, and hope.
You need your own TV show. Who's watching? Oprah? Is the Oprah channel watching? You need your own TV show. You know how rare it
Thank
is?
you.
I'm not trying to derail this, but you know how rare it is to find someone who can ask a good question? Like, I've been journaling about this a lot lately. No shade to prior interviewers, but I
Yeah,
have, because I think being curious nowadays, I feel like it's a gift. Not everyone has been able to preserve
yeah, yeah,
that in that curiosity, which I guess ties into wonder, because I think wonder does have, there's something. Let's talk about kids. There's something about the curiosity of a child. Asking a question is always a risk, but kids don't understand it as that, so they'll just ask
hmm
anything. And I say a risk because when you're older, you start to feel
yeah,
stupid
yeah,
to wonder. You start to feel stupid to be curious. And I think we lose that it kind of atrophies in us, that muscle that allows us to become deeply curious and ask good questions like you do. So I want you to have your own TV show,
thank you, thank you,
and for everyone to be able to benefit from this.
thank you,
But yeah,
thank
wonder is
you.
my favorite chapter as well, because I've known what it is to have my pain consumed primarily, and that to be the most attractive thing about what I've written. I think that's really like that's really painful, frankly, as a Black writer, to know that people are just really interested in consuming your pain. And so I love chapters like Wonder that, you know, are about beauty, because I think there's something truer about me that's in the Wonder chapter than other chapters maybe. But when I'm talking about wonder, I'm talking about like just, you know, the ability to just kind of sit back when you're aware in the moment that something's beautiful, when you have a presence to the beautiful, you know. Uh, and I think we've all had moments like that, but I think it certainly becomes harder when you have access to the terrors of the world, you know, with the quick scroll. Like never before we have this access to so much pain, for better and worse, right? I didn't like to be ignorant either, but at the same time, it's a lot. It's a lot of pain at our fingertips, and I think the only way is to resist that with some kind of habit of attuning to the beautiful. And I say the simple because I think if you read the book, you'll see I've been on a hike or two. I hiked the Himalayas. Wouldn't do it again, but it was a good experience. But I think I've been around people who they talk about beauty, but it's in this very inaccessible way. It's like, you need to hike the Himalayas. You need to hike some mountain. You need to like reach a summit, or you need to be like out wandering in the woods and come upon this like glacial, anyway. And it's always kind of reeked a little bit of like elitism, reeked a little bit of privilege in a way that just made it inaccessible. And so I've avoided it, and I hate that I've done that, because I think I mean, that's the clearing, right? That's the clearing. You know, they didn't have there's not a whole lot. She's the beauty of the clearing itself isn't described as this like wonderful, you know, misty, you know, kind of thing. It's just like, it's a clearing. But what are people making of the clearing? Anyways, so for me, I know that my kind of journey to liberation can't be sustained without this practice of like very simple pursuit of beauty, something that everyone can attain, something that me and my current ill body can attain. And so that doesn't look like climbing a mountaintop anymore, but do I have something to learn from like the soap bubble and kind of the beauty of the like the oxidized pan? Do I have something to learn from like the way this paint is chipping on my wall, and or the way the light's coming through the window? I think those small moments, the fidelity to the beautiful in those small moments, are really how we will survive.
I have to like to make sure that you're like attuned, right? It's something that I've prioritized because I'm in Mississippi. I don't know if you know, but I'm in Mississippi, and like, you know, we're driving, and I'm like, all of a sudden, some years back, I was like, I'm driving through like these landscapes that people like come down and film, and I'm just thinking of it as just this road, you know, like there aren't even
Yeah.
forests like this everywhere anymore, you know? And so I tell my son, like, you know, look outside, look out the window, and like look at all these trees that we have to like cut through in order to get to the city, you know? And just how much of like I don't know, I just think that that aspect of like nature
Yeah.
and the simple is important. And like you said, I think that's what the clearing's about. Because I think there's like nothing out there but like
Right.
it's just a
Yeah,
clearing. It's
there's a
like a
road.
rock there that they go to, you know. It's just
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I'm with all of that. Let's see. I got ooh, that's interesting. So to be heart design, yeah, the live will be on my page. And you know, we'll share it out and stuff like that. And Purpose Powell asks, is there a connection for you between the biological and sound?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I mean, that's it's really weird that that person asked that question, because I'm writing about that right now. I don't know how many people know this, that noise
Wow.
pollution is a public health risk, a public health crisis. I'm sorry. Why? I don't know why no one's talking about this. Like, I'm that annoying person at the dinner table who's like,
Hmm.
do you guys know what noise you. Our ears
Do you
our
not
ears are
know?
not evolving at the
Yeah.
rate that they need to adapt to the kind of the extent of sound that we have in our world today, just because of all the like
Mm-hmm.
electronics, the building, the whatever. Anyway, I this is, maybe I learned this like a year ago, and I just was shocked and just
Mm-hmm.
like literally, I'm like, how have I never heard this before? And you know what places are that have the most noise? Of course, it's urban centers that deal with this the most. But there's more and
Mm-hmm.
more research saying that it's tied to well, I'm not going to list specific diseases, but I know enough to know that it's tied to diseases and chronic health conditions, noise. So I'm that annoying person. If I haven't gone to the movies in 2 years because of this pandemic, but I'm the person in the movie theater. If it's that, I'll literally go and tell them to turn it down because I'm like, this is too loud, and I don't know
Yeah.
what this is doing to me. And I think about it constantly. I think about
Yeah.
the violence of sound, especially when you don't have control of it. So now also, since the pandemic, I've already said I'm jumpy. I'm telling you guys all my business, but I'm jumpy. I'm jumpy around noise. So we bought this stereo system. I'm writing about this right now. We bought this stereo thing during the pandemic. It works off. It's so bad because the speech is at like a normal level, but like the background noise will just explode. It'll be so loud. And then I'll jump. So, anyways, we watch it. We used to with my husband, literally with his hand on the volume sound, so we could turn it down quick. Because after I'll get
Because you
so, my
gotta, yeah.
body will get so wired after that, it doesn't, it can't rationalize. You can't rationalize yourself out of those like kind of, yeah, embodied responses. Um, so I poured a glass of water on it a few months ago on the speaker system. And that's my confession. And I was like, this is the only way I'm gonna save my marriage, because I cannot take one more like loud crash. And you know, I'm starting to tie it all together really. Like the my therapist, she's like, you know, that's a PTSD, you know, that's very common to a PTSD
Mm-hmm.
are sensitive to sound. People who are recovering from trauma are sensitive to sound. It's not all that unusual that this is happening right now. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm starting to piece it together. So there's this like larger public health risk. There's those of us who have known trauma or who
Mm-hmm.
have known some level of traumatic stress that sounds might be particularly sensitive to you. But then I just think everyone should be aware of it. So you mentioned the silence of God early on, and I've started to really view that as, I used to think like, what is happening? You know, what is with the silence of God? And there's someone, Carolyn, someone, she says the silence of God is God, and I think Endo in his book Silence, I won't pronounce his first name right, so I'll just say Endo in the book Silence, um, also deals with it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, could there be something really beautiful and really restful in the silence of the divine? That's not this neglect, that's not abandonment, but that's actually saying, like, here, I'm going to meet the loudness of the world, the violence of sound in this world with this, like, present silence to say like, you can stop, you know.
Yeah.
At least that's how I like to think of it.
Yeah. When you first started talking about it, and again, shout out to, I wanted to make sure I got the name. Yeah, Purpose Powell, for that question. When I was reading the question and just thinking about like what you're saying about like noise pollution, it's like this attempt at
Mm,
drowning out God, right? If we people who have experienced, prayer and contemplation and meditation, right? Because that's kind of when I first started like engaging with this concept of God as silence was with meditation and longer prayer, right? Because I first came to meditation like, oh my God,
yeah.
I don't know what I'm gonna do with all
Mm-hmm.
this silence, right? And so I was like, well, like I said earlier, I'll pray, like I'll start it with prayer, and that way I'll be able to
Yeah.
like sit for that long, and then I became okay with that silence. And then when you think about like what this world is trying to do through noise, through all of these things that are just
Mhm.
always
Yeah.
making noise, you know? That is an interesting thing to start like writing about. So whenever you drop whatever you are writing about, please tag me so I can read it because that is something that is super interesting. And like I
Yeah.
said, that was an awesome question. Um, all right, let's see here. No, let's see, and make sure I'm good on
You're
time. I don't
good.
want to keep you too long too. Um, let's go here. Okay. So here's a good one. And we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but when my mom used to make me usher in church, I hated it. I
Mhm.
hated handing out the fans. I hated picking up people. And as I've gotten older, actually, I've started collecting recordings of those instances
Mhm.
in Black churches. And I didn't necessarily know why. When you discuss the emotional truth telling you've experienced while visiting Black churches, you said if there was any performance in the wailing, dancing, and celebration, it was the kind
Yeah.
of art that is for healing and not for consumption. That when not being consumed, Black lament is something to behold. Can you speak to the dangers of that consumption and the beauty of its presence in the
Yes.
absence
Yeah.
of consumption?
Yeah. Uh, I think there's always been a hunger for Black pain, but I think since the summer of 2020, I think that did something to white people. I think since there's been a really sinister hunger for the kind of spectacle of Black pain. Um, yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's probably more complicated than I understand, but there's some kind of curiosity, some kind of like some kind of, yeah, it opens something up, I think, in a way that people
Mm-hmm.
now want access to it. And um, I think people think that seeing it or having access to it will somehow absolve them of it. I'm not really sure, honestly, but I think there is this hunger, this a growing appetite for Black pain. So it's a really complicated time to like publicly create anything as a Black person, which I'm doing because I'm always thinking like, who is this for, you know, and even and will it make it
Mm-hmm.
to them
Yeah.
if it's being devoured by other people before it actually reaches the arms that I want it to go to. um so yeah, I think it's a real danger. It's led to, you know, a lot of unfortunate art, I think, that has maybe led too much into that or fed that appetite a little too much, probably more than it intended to. um but I think, you know, absent of that, you know, when that's not in the, I think it has real potential. I'm all about Black. I'm about both. You know, I'm
Mm-hmm.
about Black joy. I'm about the wonder, but also I don't want to lose sight that there is something really sacred and really special about like witnessing Black pain. At least I have, if it's done in a way of presence and not consumption. And so I'm talking about this experience in a
Mm-hmm.
church that I was attending in Philly, and you know, there was this kind of like public. We were beating our fists against our chests. And I think there's a really negative connotation around like theater and performance because we're all like about authenticity right now. No one really is.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we
Yeah.
say. Anyway, but I think, you know, not all theater is bad. Not all public
Mm-hmm.
theater is bad. Like some art is actually beautiful. And can we think about some performances, even if you have, it takes a little, even if it takes something for you to tap into it, tap into the theater of it, like, can it still be beautiful when it's not for an audience of
Yeah.
white, you know, hungry white faces, but it's in the presence of kind of the collective. I think that there is something beautiful in that, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like when I was reading that part, I was thinking, like I said, about when I used to like the I mean, my mom said it looked like she had done something terrible to me when she would make me be an usher. And I was like, but what an interesting thing to like kind of be in charge
Yeah.
of
Wow.
managing that wailing. And to assist. And some of these people who what I think happened as I got older, I got a chance to understand their stories and kind of understand how that was healing
Mhm.
them on those Sundays. and something else you talked about, like this being such a difficult time to be a Black creative. You actually wrote about it in your essay, Black History Month is over, thank goodness. And you have this part where you say, because of what white capitalism has done to us, it requires great strength to resist the gaze of whiteness,
Mm-hmm.
because one, the white gaze pays, and two,
Yep.
white
Yep.
affirmation goes viral. You know, and and I was reading it, while I was doing, I call it reconnaissance. Like I look at everything that y'all have done so I can ask, these good questions. And I was like, yeah, because it's like, you make something for your folks, and then next thing you know, you like, I mean, you go viral, but
Yep.
is it for the right reasons? It's like that moment that Dave Chappelle was talking about. When he was like, that one guy was
Yeah.
laughing in a different, sinister way, and he was like, I had to get away, right? And like it's just an interesting thing, because you want to do the work of healing the community, of not necessarily even like fixing the community, but like being in community with people as
Mm-hmm.
they experience these things, right? um but you don't know if
No.
it'll get to the right
And
people,
it's a temptation.
yeah,
I mean, I talk about I've heard people talk about the temptation, the pressure of the white gaze, but I would love to be in conversations where we talk about the real temptations of it, of like there is economic benefit to having the white gaze on your work. It's terrifying. That terrifies me.
yeah,
That terrifies me because I have to interrogate myself every time I post, every time I, go to write. I have to ask myself, like, um, who are you appealing to? Who's in the room with you? And did you invite them?
yeah,
Did who's in the room with you? Did you invite them? Or do you want their embrace? Do you want their money? And I'm not against people working the white gaze and getting what they need out of it at times. Like I'm not gonna
hmm,
criticize anyone for that. But at the same
yeah, yeah,
time, I know at least there have been times in my writing where the white gaze has won. Um, and I have maybe, to be even more honest, I'll take a step further and say there have been times I've known that I'm letting the white gaze win, and I've still done it. You know, and I'm gonna
yeah,
have to live with live with those moments ultimately. But more and more, the older I get, I'm trying to become honest with myself. Who's in the room with you right now? Cool, be real, you know, and to
hmm,
know that it's not my responsibility to try to like shoo away the wrong people from my work. And I'm not going to take that on myself. I'm not going to feel guilty for that. But at the same time, all I can do is do my best at speaking to who I want to speak to and being true to my experience. And yeah, sometimes that means you have sea of a sea of whiteness that's ready to take your work and do what they want with it. Uh, like that Washington
yeah.
Post article, for example. I think they had to shut down the comment section, and sometimes that means it gets to the places it needs to get, and so yeah, constant tension. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or stings the
Mm-hmm.
people who need to be stung, into like at least the experience of like question themselves. So I'm thinking about I gotta find it. I'm thinking about, what did you name her?
The brunette
Brunette.
beast.
What did you name? The brunette beast, right? And how, even in the wake of like of meditating on what happened with Emmett Till, it's more so upsetting, that you are upset than the
Mm-hmm.
fact
Yeah.
that this occurred. Um, that that scene has me thinking about, what we were talking about in terms of consumption, what we were talking about in terms of the white gaze, that shift
Mm-hmm.
of 2020, you know, where are these people in their interrogation process, with that response, because it's not going to be helpful, to the people you are purporting to
Mm-hmm.
now, I
Yeah.
guess, see.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let me see here. Okay. Is this? mm, Let's go with. Okay. So, in the chapter on repair, I guess, yeah, we could let this, I guess, be our last one. Unless if anyone has a question, you can go ahead and drop in the comment. Um, but in the chapter on repair, you interrogate Christ's death and the meaning often attributed to it. in an interview with a religious news service, you said that you also question whether or not people who call themselves Christian would claim you because of your
Hmm.
questioning the divinity of Jesus. One thing I loved about this book entirely is that I feel like so much of Christianity is often rooted in not questioning. And this book doesn't care one iota about that. And yet it's deeply spiritual and deeply rooted in the contemplation of the spiritual. Why do you think there exists this aversion to questioning in Christianity anyway? And why was that something that was important throughout,
Yeah,
your writing of this
I
book?
think I think that desire in Christianity for clarity and for knowing.
Hmm.
I personally do think it's rooted in white supremacy. I think it's the same mechanism that makes white supremacists want white people to conquer and be, superior, is the same kind of thing that's driving many Christians to this place where, like, if their religion isn't right, if it's not the right, it can't just be good, it can't just be beautiful. It's not about it being beautiful or good. It has
Hmm.
to be the truest thing. It has to be the right thing. And I don't find much liberation in spaces like that. Like, if you believe that, then, like, naturally, then I guess, like, that's you. But I think so many people are forcing that on themselves because they've been told that you need to know exactly what you think, and it needs to be the right. It needs to be supreme, right? Your needs to be supreme. It
Hmm.
can't just be, yeah. Anyways, so I think it's that same thing that also doesn't want us to question things in spirituality, that doesn't want us to not know, that rejects mystery, because mystery is just, it doesn't, it's not a good weapon for conquering anything. I don't know,
Come
it's not
on
a
now.
good
Yeah,
weapon,
yeah.
um and so I just, there not many people, there are people out there who have found a real harbor in it, but in my experience, a lot of white Christian religious spaces aren't okay with it. They're very threatened by it, and I have some compassion on that. They're threatened by it because they've been sold the lie, right? That if they're not supreme, then what are they? What are they? What are they worth? So if their religion isn't supreme, then what
Hmm.
is it worth?
Yeah,
What is it? And it's
yeah.
inconceivable for it to be beautiful if it's not supreme. I reject this, and I want more people to. And I think you can still have. I think, when people hear me say things like, I wake up most days and I'm like, I don't know if Jesus was divine or not. When people hear this, they, like, run for the hills. I lose followers by thousands. I
Hmm.
think they're just
Yeah.
terrified of the uncertainty in me. But and they think that that's going to lead to some kind of shallow spiritual engagement, when really I think, yeah, I think I have a very deep spiritual engagement because of my curiosity and because of, like, how much I'm willing to say I don't know. That's led me to places in myself. That's led me to places in my interior world that I wouldn't have gone in the days when I was pretending to be so
Yeah,
certain about everything.
yeah, yeah. I was like, I love that about the book. It's like, I wonder if, like you said, if those people who feel like they have to have like this,
Yeah.
I think it's dogmatic is the word I'm looking for, but this dogmatic response where we are right, and if you're
Yeah.
not right,
Uh,
you know where you got to go, right? In the end type thing, they're not like really engaging with what they are purporting to believe in at least a healthy way.
but
Surely you have some questions. Surely you want to ask those things of your sacred text that you see that aren't necessarily
yeah.
used in sermon, right? Um, so I just loved that about the book, and I thought that was such a funny like ending in that interview. You know, 'cause I was like, yeah,
What? I
the
know.
interview was
I
probably
can't
like,
believe she put that in there, honestly. I hung up that call and I was like, that might have worked out.
well,
uh,
yeah, yeah. Let's see. We did get some more in from the folks. Let's see what they got here. Okay, this is from okay. This is from I run a page called Books or Pop Culture where we talk about books. And let me see if I can put it up here. Will it go up? No, I can't put it up. But it says, who would you like to see me interview next on ABMR
Oh.
Conversation?
Okay, the first person that came to mind was Christina Cleveland, just because of what we were talking about earlier in the conversation. She's a scholar, a free-spirited scholar. She just wrote God as a Black Woman. She's really so smart. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else that's coming to mind. But yeah, she's definitely the first. So I'll honor that and say Christina Cleveland. Yeah.
Okay. And then the other question was, do you feel like you have gained any cool points by
I don't
being
know. I'll
on
have
this
to check
interview?
comments out after. Like maybe everyone's like, "Who is this girl? Why is he talking to her?" So I need to reference the. But hopefully, I'm hoping. That's why I came. That's why I'm here.
It's so funny. Let me double check and make sure I didn't have any more in here. Yeah, we'll save the live. Yeah, okay. All right. Well, yeah, like I said, I always say that I try to stop at an hour. But I am so appreciative if you're just tuning in. We were talking about co-author Riley's This Here Flesh. An amazing, amazing book. As you see, my tab game was very serious here. That's because there are a lot of gems. There are things in there, and like we said earlier, it's not preachy, which is something that I like about this book and Dante's book. You know, it's more about like your discovery and how it can help other people like discover things about themselves in terms of their spirituality, whether you're a Christian or whatever. You know, it's something that I think is amazing about this work and the page Black Liturgy, because there's so much that you can kind of get from it. So Cole, thank you, thank you, thank you. I
Thank
really,
you.
really, really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
All right.
Yes. All right then, folks. We out. Peace.